Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back to another episode of the Anonymous Investors Podcast. I am your host, Charlie Munger, and this week I'm visited by the extraordinary, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing God, creator of the universe, mismanager of money, always needs more of your money. What's happening tonight, God? How's your evening going? Let the people know.
My evening's going pretty good. We have a couple of interesting topics to talk about today. I think we should start off with what recently happened with Twitter. So basically, Twitter, um, Elon Musk just bought a 9.2% stake in Twitter, and the stock increased by over 40% this past week. And basically, his motivation for buying this stock in Twitter is that he's a proponent of free speech. And recently, people were getting deplatformed for Twitter for various different reasons. And basically, he's trying to restore faith in Twitter, this social media platform, and restore faith in free speech and basically democratize free speech. So, basically, Twitter, in its early days, right, of Twitter was basically, it was founded under the premise of free speech. And now, recently, we see Twitter getting away from free speech, basically deplatforming people, basically censoring people, taking away their free speech rights. You got Trump that was taken down from Twitter and basically deplatformed and censored because of the January 6th Capitol riots. Some people think that he should have got taken down. Some people think that he shouldn't have gotten taken down. I think it's pretty clear that he shouldn't have gotten taken down. He basically said that people should peacefully protest, and he didn't encourage people to go into the Capitol and riot like some other people expect. Then you got Alex Jones, who was basically censored and deplatformed off Twitter. And this is more reasonable that he was actually taken down and censored. He's basically this guy that was saying that the Sandy Hook killings of children were like fake and they weren't real. But the problem is when you censor people like Alex Jones, is the line slowly moves more and more to the right. So people don't want to make the connection between Alex Jones and say an ordinary citizen in Wisconsin who gets deplatformed. But slowly over time, people use Alex Jones, then someone slightly less crazy, someone like slightly less crazy than Alex Jones. They use them as justifications for taking somebody off the platform. So basically, Elon Musk wants to defend free speech and democratize free speech. So he bought this stake in Twitter. And believe it or not, in the early days of Twitter was actually founded under the premise of free speech. It was in their core corporate governance documents that basically they wanted to defend free speech and democratize it. And this was a big Dick Costolo. I think he was basically like a very early CEO. He was basically like a huge proponent of this. And so basically another motivation I think that Elon Musk uh, bought Twitter was this news publication website, the Babylon Bee. And he gets his it's like this right wing slightly right wing satire piece. He gets most of his information and comedy from this. They basically just recently took down the Babylon Bee for saying that this transgender woman was the man of the year, and they refused to restore the account unless the Babylon Bee took down this tweet, which they refused to do. So basically, the question I want to propose to you is: do you think that these social media platforms, these big tech companies, these private enterprises have the right to censor people since it's their own platform and the Constitution doesn't apply to private enterprises? Or do you think that they don't have the right since the framers of the Constitution didn't expect the internet to be the place of public discourse, and they didn't expect the internet to be a political discourse space and to basically take over as the de facto public square? What do you think about this censorship?
So I think in the current day and age, presence on the internet is like very important. I think it's pretty much impossible to be any type of public figure, any sort of large entity, whether that be commercial or, like I said, a public figure. It's very hard to protect your image and to protect your reputation and grow your audience and grow your base without having any sort of online presence. So my take more so is like all social media should be kind of treated as like a public utility at this point. It's just become like a really weird space where you had all these companies kind of come up out of nothing, right? Think about how Facebook was founded. Facebook was literally created. It was like based on like hot or not, right, on Harvard's campus, and then spread to other campuses, other Ivy League schools, and then gradually all campuses, and then it became, they opened the door to everyone. And then even looking at like the founding of Twitter, like it literally started as a way to like find raves and to like party, right? So it's kind of funny how it just like took over and became this big thing. Like obviously the growth to that is insane, and like what they built in the process sort of was like a happy accident for a lot of people. But as far as censorship's concerned, I think no one should be censored. Like the best way to fight bad speech or people who are saying things that you don't necessarily agree with is with good speech. Like people who disagree with Alex Jones, as crazy as he is, like he still has a right to say those things and to do whatever he wants, because just like you have the right to criticize him, he has the right to say those things. And if he wants to go out and say all this crazy shit, as long as he's not inciting violence or like actively ordering like his followers to attack people or certain groups of people, I think that he has every right to say what he wants. And then we'll all go, well, he's a fucking lunatic. Like, why would you listen to him? It's interesting that you brought up Jones, because Jones is actually the most censored person in internet history. But meanwhile, on Amazon, you can go and buy a copy of Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's autobiography. And he tries to, um, I mean, if you read it, it's pretty much him just looking to garner sympathy from people about like his situation, his upbringing, um, and how he came to despise, people who were followers of Judaism. And it's just like he tries to invoke like empathy, but the main thing is that it's freaking Hitler. Like, why are they like if they're gonna sell books and stuff that's based around him, then like why are you banning Jones? Like with what Jones did and what he was inciting, it's like nowhere near the level of incitement that like Hitler garnered.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Like basically, they sell Hitler's diary, I think, and other books by Hitler, and basically, there's these Nazi groups that basically you could argue that the books are inciting violence in and of themselves. But I still don't agree with that. They should ban even Nazi books because it's a record of history, and I think it's important for people to see history, what's going on, so that they don't repeat the same mistakes and such. So I'm a proponent of, in order to fight bad speech, you fight it with good speech instead of censoring people and their ideas. Because when you censor people and their ideas, you actually give more validity to it, and you base the movement grows even faster than you wanted it to by shutting it down. You can't censor people's speech. It just lights people on fire and causes the movement to grow faster and faster.
I completely agree with you. And the other thing is that I like that Elon took up this position, right? So he bought for those of you who don't know, he bought 9% of Twitter. It was like 9.2%. And now
And he
he's
also
the,
got a board seat.
Mhm.
He also got a board seat too.
Yeah. So he also filed reports. He initially filed, and like from what I heard, when he initially filed, he didn't file with the SEC to be like an activist investor, but he quickly like retracted that, and now he's an activist investor within Twitter. So now he's pushing to make changes to the platform, which is awesome because you see a lot of people maligned on Twitter. The problem with social media is not only are they like private enterprise and they can kind of censor things to whichever way they want, and obviously like you said, they don't have to. They're not necessarily bound by the Constitution. It's not like they're a governmental entity, but so there's this weird gray area where they are allowed to censor people. But what you typically see in Silicon Valley, and we've seen this with various other different companies, like Facebook's a great example, right? So Twitter and Facebook, they'll typically censor people who have like differing viewpoints than like the echo chambers that they're looking to promote. So you'll see people who are on the right, and also too, YouTube is a big fucking well, we like YouTube. I'll put it that way. So Facebook and Twitter are great examples because they will typically censor people who have differing opinions than those in Silicon Valley, and they'll go out of their way to censor them, and they'll shadow ban people, and they play all these games, and really it doesn't hurt those people because everyone kind of knows what's going on, and it just builds up and adds more validity to their movements. So I don't even know why they do it to begin with.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add the counterpoint of what some people think when Elon Musk bought this stake in Twitter, because some people think that he's actually, as crazy as it sounds, some people think that he's actually going to be a proponent for more restricted speech. And remember that there was this guy that worked for Tesla, and I don't think this applies to the free speech argument, but I'm just gonna give the other people's counter viewpoints. There was this guy that worked for Tesla, and he basically posted reviews of Tesla's autopilot function, and he was basically criticizing it. And then he was fired. And then there was just basically there was this author from a Seeking Alpha article, and he basically told basically Elon Musk called up his boss and told him about that the stories that this author was writing about him were untrue, and he got the guy fired. So some people think that Elon Musk is actually going to be a proponent for more restricted speech, but I don't think this applies because he's not basically restricting people's speech. He's just basically causing them to face the consequences of their speech. And facing the consequences of your speech is not the same as basically restricting someone's speech and preventing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because, like obviously on our show, we're both big time free speech excuse me, we're both big time free speech advocates. So we definitely don't want people being censored, and we think it's important that people don't get censored because, like we said, the main way to fight bad speech is with good speech. And if enough people come out and they say stupid things, like we're gonna malign them and we're gonna be like, this guy's a moron, don't listen to him. And you'll find more often than not that people who have horrible viewpoints, like really despicable viewpoints, and have like a very jaded view of the world, you more often than not, like they find a way to make themselves look stupid in front of everyone else, and all their validity and credibility that they did have before then will just be completely tarnished, and all the other varying different things that they did in the past will just come to light, and they'll just dig a hole for themselves and they'll just jump into the grave. So I'm happy that Elon took a stake in Twitter. I think it's a nice change of pace. He seems to be more of a centrist and a moderate, so it doesn't seem. See, the problem with Twitter is that they became like very woke and like very far left, to the point where there were various different groups on Twitter. I won't go into too much detail, but there were varying different groups on Twitter that particularly let's put it this way, like extreme left, to the point where some of the behavior is like really deplorable and just downright disgusting. So it'll be good to see how that's enforced. And also, I heard recently that he proposed the implementation of like an edit button. He also ran a poll about this on Twitter, and he asked everyone, "Oh, would you guys like to see an edit button?" And it looked like resoundingly everyone said yes. Is this the case?
Yes, basically people wanted an edit button. And the reason why people didn't have an edit button on Twitter is because of the retweet function. So people were afraid basically on Twitter that somebody would tweet something and then basically revise what they were tweeting or edit what they're tweeting. And then the person that retweeted it would be retweeting something that they didn't mean to retweet. So basically you could say like, um, I am a fan of the Yankees, right? And this is just a basic example. And then the person, and you retweet it because you agree with the statement that you're a fan of the Yankees. And then basically the person revises the tweet and they say, I'm a fan of the Mets or I'm a fan of the Red Sox. Now you just retweeted something that you didn't mean to retweet. But I think this problem is actually easily solvable, and they should have. Many other social media websites actually do this. Is basically anytime something's edited, you basically have a link with an editorial log to basically show what was originally said and then what was edited. So basically, you can't edit something and then basically have someone say something that they didn't mean to say.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like a bait and switch, right? So you use the baseball analogy, great example, but now like take that and apply that to someone saying like and retweet to spread happiness throughout the world. I actually had a conversation about this with someone earlier today, but like imagine on Twitter there was an account that said like and retweet to spread happiness and love throughout the world, and then they edited the tweet or whatever, they changed it, and they were like, retweet if you hate everyone or like whatever. or something like really hurtful, right? So obviously the people who like or retweet that are going to look bad and they're going to get maligned. So I'm glad that they're considering adding that new feature, and I think that that's such an important thing. But as far as anything else with Twitter, so I find it really interesting because you talk about how we talk about how Twitter is very restrictive with certain things. Twitter is kind of weird because there was one point where Twitter was considering selling itself to Disney because Jack Dorsey has at the time, or he's at least still has very close ties to Bob Iger, who's the former CEO of Disney, and he was the CEO for like quite some time. But he kind of served as Jack Dorsey's mentor. But I think that that deal kind of fell apart because Twitter is really weird with like what they allow and what they don't. So compared to other social medias, like Twitter has like a major type of like pornographic I don't know, content. So like you could be on Twitter and then it's just some girl like getting fucked on there. But then on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, there's no place for that. But then at the same time, they'll censor people if like you tweet "I love Trump" or you say, "Oh wow, Nancy Pelosi's a fucking bozo." You just get censored. But then at the same time, it's like you could literally scroll down like two tweets and it's like some girl just getting like railed. It's just kind of funny how that works.
I actually think I have a solution, and I think Elon actually proposed this too, to like this problem where people are seeing stuff that they don't want to see. And I believe actually that like Twitter and these other social media platforms, they should basically have an open source algorithm where the user basically chooses what content they want to see instead of the content being curated by like these platforms and such. So if everything was open source, you wouldn't censor people, and you wouldn't basically be controlling what people say, and be basically the people could see what they want. So you're solving all aspects of the solution.
I totally agree. And on that same note, I don't know if you saw this, but Jack Dorsey, I mentioned him previously. He actually came out and he said that he feels like he's to blame for centralizing the internet. It looked like that came out as a big time headline this past week in the Wall Street Journal. And I find that interesting because he's really sort of geared more towards decentralization. And obviously, he's a giant Bitcoin proponent. He rebranded Square to Block, right? So obviously, he's very much interested in the blockchain, very much interested in crypto, and he also spoke at the Bitcoin conference, which is actually this weekend, interestingly enough. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. But I think it's worth mentioning because it seems that now he's kind of, and he's a pretty like left wing type of guy. So now it seems like he's kind of backtracking on a lot of different philosophies he had in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how he interacts with Elon because I think that they're on pretty good terms. I don't think that they're like super close, but I know that they're both pretty reasonable. And at least Jack seems to be more of like a moderate compared to some of the other people. I think that it's at least in the past he kind of capitulated and gave into like a lot of the people who were on the left who were very not to get political but very like radical left. So it'll be interesting to see how him and Elon interact, but now it looks like Elon's the largest shareholder, right?
Yeah, Elon's the largest shareholder. I actually don't think Jack Dorsey is a person that leans left. I think he's actually a person that is on the right, but I think he just lost control of Twitter because he only has like a 2.5% stake in Twitter now. And but I think the problem with why social media is basically leans left and censors most of the people on the right. It's there's it's a multifaceted issue. So you got one, right? You got basically the concentration of their employees in a very liberal area. So basically, like most of the employees of Twitter are working in Silicon Valley. So they're basically kind of held hostage by their employees if they don't capitulate to the employees' demands. You're going to see a lot of employees quit and basically move to other jobs and other social media platforms. So they're kind of like threatened in that way, in their centralization of the labor force. And they should think about uh, decentralizing their employees and moving them across different areas of the United States and different areas of the world, so that they're not beholden to like a one person's viewpoint in that regard. And then you also got pressure coming from politicians, et cetera, to censor people and control speech in that regard. So you got basically pressure coming from the top and then pressure coming from the bottom. But, I don't think Jack Dorsey necessarily leans left. I think he just lost control of his company and lost control of implementing his idea of free speech.
I'm glad you brought up decentralization because Coinbase actually does that. They're fully decentralized. They claim that they don't have any headquarters. Obviously, they have some property in Hudson Yards, right? And that's all rented property, at least for like physical office space. But they claim that they don't have a global headquarters and that the company operates like almost entirely remotely worldwide. So I'm glad you really brought that up. It seems to me, at least, that that's kind of the trend that a lot of these other tech companies are going to follow. At least for roles, of course, that don't involve you physically being in an office or physically working on like a job site. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens there in that respect. But I love the idea of just like fully decentralizing and getting away from like headquarters or physical locations because obviously the company will save on overhead, but obviously you get the most important thing, which is diversity of opinion and diversity of like background and experiences, which is that's how you build a company. Like you can't just have 100 people or 200 people working for you or thousands of people working for you and everyone has the same freaking idea, because then what happens is it just breeds a culture of complacency, and it also breeds a culture of like a lack of innovation.
Right. I couldn't agree more with that. And did you see there was also a couple other ideas that Elon floated on Twitter for basically implementation on Twitter. So he basically put on Twitter. He basically listed like the top 10 Twitter profiles. I think it was like Taylor Swift, Justin Bieber, Obama, etc. And you see basically that all these top Twitter uh, users, they're actually like they haven't tweeted in like 3 4 months. So basically, you're seeing Twitter losing its relevance, and he's coming in looking for ways that he can change it just and basically make Twitter a better place. And there's a lot of problems with Twitter. You see the crypto bots on Twitter, all these other bots showing like user growth on Twitter. But I actually think user growth on Twitter is actually declining when you eliminate and get rid of all these crypto bots, these scammers, all these non-human entities. And I think Twitter should actually think about a way of verifying their users so they actually know that their users are real. Much like Amazon does when you become a seller, or Walmart does when you become a seller, and some of these other platforms. I think um, these social media platforms should look towards ways of making sure these users are real and not just robots.
I totally agree. So what was going on with this whole hydra thing that you were telling me about offline? I know a lot of people have questions about that, myself included. So like, can you just clue everyone in with what's been going on with that?
Yeah, so basically the Hydra, it was kind of like this darknet website. It had like 9 million sellers on it worldwide, 17 million customers, and they basically sold narcotics, drugs, LSD. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on YouTube. I guess we'll find out if it gets taken down. But it was like kind of like a Silk Road 2.0 kind of, where they basically did all kind of like illegal activities, and basically it was shut down and seized by the German government, and they took $23 million from them. And there's a whole bunch of illegal activities on it, like I said, drugs, sex trafficking, sex traffic lights, uh, etc. All kinds of stuff that were done on it. And they said it was basically 80% of illegal crypto transactions occur on this website. So basically, we're getting rid of these illegal crypto transactions and making crypto actually more mainstream, and getting rid of this idea that basically crypto is basically a big proponent or a big cause of illegal transactions, which is something good.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, right? So there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm glad you bring up that a lot of people have this sort of jaded viewpoint that crypto is only used for illegal transactions. But I can tell you for a fact the number one thing used for illegal transactions is the US dollar. And that's just the case, right? Because it's the most widely accepted thing. It is the most widely used currency in the world, and that's just what it is. Like people obviously are going to use US dollars more for any type of illegal crime or illicit activity. But I'm glad that you bring this up because at the same time, like what happened with Hydra happens to all of these darknet markets. Like they all go under at some point, usually because of A government shutdown, which happens more often than people think, and B, because of an exit scam, due to the fact that the way that they're structured, all of the money from clients that goes to sellers goes into some type of third party escrow account. And usually what happens is the founders of the website, rather than sending the money out and controlling the escrow account properly, they know that they only have a finite amount of time before law enforcement closes in on them. So they typically will let the escrow account build up a crazy balance, and then they'll just steal the money and run. But it's just very interesting because you would think by now these people would understand that almost all um, cryptocurrency transactions are traceable and they're permanent and immutable, and they stay on the blockchain forever. So you would think that they actually would kind of like stay away from that, but for whatever reason they insist on using it, and I just find it kind of hilarious because even when you think about how to even access certain parts of the dark web, like you use the Tor browser. For those of you who don't know, and obviously we don't encourage using the Tor browser unless you're a journalist or like a whistleblower looking to get information out, or you're from a country that likes to censor people. We don't encourage it. We think it really should be reserved for those activities alone. And that in a sense of like the democratization of information and for, personal freedoms. But as far as using Tor, like Tor was created by US Naval Intelligence. So it's very funny how people seem to think that the government doesn't have a backdoor. They think, oh, just because they use Tor, that there's somehow like away from the eye of ISPs, which is true. You are, because you're going through nodes and you're going through Tor exit nodes. That's a long, nuanced conversation to get into, and I don't think we have to get into it at this time. But if you want to read more about that, you can. But it just seems that people seem to think that by accessing Tor, they're going to somehow get away from the government, even though it was created by the government. So it's just very laughably funny.
Well, basically the government can come in at the ISP level, even if you have a VPN, etc. They can come in through your wireless router connection to see what's going on. So you're not going to avoid uh, the government scrutiny for long if you're committing illegal activity and doing stuff like that. But an interesting point I wanted to bring up, which I learned after like researching this website, is during COVID-19, actually SEX traffic light actually increased 12.5% during this time because people were indoors and they were basically they had a higher demand for it. So you saw like this traffic light increasing over this period of time. And recently, actually, you have hotels and everything like that. This was put in. This was a law that was put in recently in the United States. They're basically required to like go through a checklist every time somebody checks into a hotel to make sure they're not a traffic lighter. So basically, they have to see like how many items they're carrying, and they don't ask you this. They just like examine what you're doing, and then they go through their checklist. How many items are you carrying? Are you putting on your door like don't clean my room for like 3 or 4 days at a time? Are you doing this, 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 and this? And then if you meet the checklist, they can actually come into your hotel room and like see what's going on, see if any traffic lighting is going on.
That's very interesting because I didn't know that at all. But as far as like what you just previously mentioned, it's like commonly known that that's one of the biggest like black markets in the world, and it's obviously something that needs to be stopped. And I'm glad that law enforcement's finally like cracking down on people that engage in those activities because there's no place for it. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say beyond that. So.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring up this argument because some people think that PROSTITUTION should be legal, and I see their point. Where it brings in governmental revenue. It's between two consenting adults, etc. But when you look at the facts, right? Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, they actually made PROSTITUTION, legal. You saw like you saw it, I think in Sweden, there was 200 cases of traffic lighting going on a year, and it basically 5x to 1,000, and that's just the reported or basically the discovered amount of traffic lighting. So, I don't necessarily have a problem with two consenting adults doing this activity or committing in this activity, but by making PRS, DIT, UTION illegal, you're basically stifling demand for SEX, and you're basically limiting the overall supply, since people don't want to go to jail, and basically people don't know where to get this act from.
Yeah, so on that same note, going back to Hydra, though, I mean, at what point do these guys realize that they're going to get caught, right? Like, we saw how many different darknet sites get taken down. We saw Silk Road 1 get taken down. Ross Ulbricht, obviously, being the mastermind behind that, serving now, it looks like 2 life sentences. He's never going to get parole. He's never going to get released, right? So Ross Ulbricht, he obviously was the fall guy for that. We saw Alpha Bay get taken down, and then that guy died in like I think a Thai prison or a Singapore prison, something like that. He was a Canadian citizen. Then we saw Empire get taken down. That was a big one, right? And then Dream Market supposedly was a sting operation that was being ran by law enforcement after the collapse of I think it was after the collapse of Alpha Bay. Empire kind of took off, and Dream Market took off. Those got shut down, and now it looks like Hydra. So at what point do these people realize that like they're just playing behind the 8 ball every time, and the government now is finally seeming to catch them and kind of have an edge on them? And now it looks like the government is setting up a lot of these markets to begin with. So like at what point do these people just realize that there's no point in attempting to do what they're trying to do, because like I said, they're using a browser, or they're at least they think that they're using a browser that is geared towards security, that was created by US Naval Intelligence, but I'm almost certain the government has backdoor access to that, right? Because
Well,
it seems that Mhm.
I don't want to get too much into this, but basically it's kind of like a whack-a-mole situation where you have these how do I put this? These certain regimes that basically are creating these websites that are sponsored by governmental regimes. These are like foreign entities, and you're basically like playing whack-a-mole, where they're just going to come back again. So they know they're going to get taken down, but they're just going to open a new one after that.
Yeah, and on that same line of thought, as far as referring to money laundering, I thought this was something, not only just money laundering, but on that same line of thought, um, necessarily dealing with payments and transactions, particularly referring to the government here. This is an interesting topic that I found. I heard that the IRS is behind on 9 million paper filed tax returns. And it looks like the IRS is going out of their way to hire 10,000 seasonal workers to try to bridge that gap. And I can't help but laugh because they're going to have 5,000 people working in 2022 and then another 5,000 working in 2023. So it's going to be
I
interesting to
mean,
see how that unfolds.
are they even able to even get these workers? Because I was reading somewhere that basically there's 5 million job openings, but basically there's only 186,000 willing labor participants who are unemployed. So basically you have 50 times the amount of job openings as there are employees. So, I would think that, I don't even know if they're going to be able to fill these jobs to basically meet their requirements. I think a better solution would be to basically require all people to e-file, so that it's basically, and develop an electronic system to check these returns, check for fraud, check for money laundering, put certain criteria in these systems instead of basically having them manually processed, which takes too long. And you could, solve a lot of these problems and a lot of these backlogs.
I think a great solution to that, I'm glad you brought that up. So you're talking about forcing people to e-file. So there's a lot of older people who don't know how to e-file, but that's the purpose of like TurboTax, right? And all these different e-filing softwares. So obviously there are rare cases where people will have to paper file. But for the most part, most people don't have to paper file, but some people still choose to because they think that I don't know. They think that by going online, they're going to like turn over all their personal information and get screwed, which I could totally get, because dealing with your taxes and obviously your social security number is listed on your return and a lot of other sensitive information. So you have to be a little wary about it. But at the same time, I think the government, at least the IRS, should offer not a tax credit, because a tax credit would result in the filing taxpayer getting money back, right? So a tax credit would be, if I say like a tax credit of $100, the IRS would write you a check for $100, which I don't think they should do, because that's basically just another stimulus. I think what they should do is offer a tax deduction. So $100 tax deduction might push you into a lower tax bracket, but at the same time, it's not going to be enough to like substantially offset like the amount of revenue that the IRS generates, right? Because $100 in most cases is not going to push you into a lower tax bracket. But I think the American taxpayer is like too stupid to realize that. So I think $100 tax deduction would be good, and you could kind of push people into e-filing, and you'll be able to process returns faster. As far as paper filing, like this is commonly known, like at least over the last 10 years, the IRS, like their overhead has gotten, they shrank significantly. I think for every like 10 taxpayers or something to that extent, or every 20 taxpayers, they have one IRS agent. So their numbers are dwindling. They're not getting the amount of funding that they should be getting. And it certainly seems that they have to be able to combat this issue, because if they have 9 million paper filed returns and no one can get a hold of them. I was also just reading that only 3% of calls to the IRS are getting through. It seems every year they're just getting worse and worse and worse, and they're going to miss out on a lot of potential governmental revenue that they would make up from auditing people, because they can't process returns fast enough. So like I know that I filed already. In my case, I don't know if you did, but like I filed and I got my refunds back right away. So obviously, I don't want a refund. I actually would much rather owe, because a tax refund is basically you just giving the government an interest-free loan for a year, which is kind of bullshit. But that's a whole nother topic to explore. But yeah, I mean, everyone should e-file, and I think the government should give people $100 tax deduction in order to e-file, because the American taxpayer is pretty stupid and they won't realize that the $100 deduction isn't actually doing anything, and it's not going to push them into a lower tax bracket. And if it does, the government will only be kind of missing out on, I don't know, $20 or $30 of like tax revenue per person.
Right, that's the benefit of e-filing. I think people should consider e-filing for that reason, and that reason alone is when you mail your tax return or whatever, you have to wait for them to process it to get your return. And when you e-file, you're basically getting your return much quicker and quicker and quicker than you normally would. So people should consider that benefit and basically e-file if they can, to basically lessen the load of this. If they e-file, they're going to get their money back sooner, and that's enough of an incentive for people to e-file. I don't think you necessarily have to give people a deduction to e-file. I think you just have to stress the point that they're going to get their return much faster than they normally would.
Yeah, and on that same topic of money, right, and things going on, and on accounting for revenue, there was a topic that we explored last week, and I feel like it's worth mentioning, at least in passing. So obviously, there's a lot of congressional hearings going on and a lot of different things going on with the Washington football team, now rebranded as the Washington Commanders, of course. So obviously, these congressional hearings are going on, but now there's someone that has testified and has alleged that the Washington football team was hiding 40% of ticket sales. We previously mentioned how they were operating two different books. We assumed it was for allegedly operating two different books, and we normally assume that it was for like tax purposes, but now it seems like they are hiding 40% of the ticket revenue from the league, because the NFL is set up in a way that it is geared towards profit sharing. So the Washington football team being in a large market, they actually lose more by reporting everything as it comes in, because a smaller market like Jacksonville or Cleveland or Cincinnati gets some of that money. So it's this weird thing in the NFL where, with the salary cap, there's like this profit sharing motive. So all the big market teams essentially subsidize the smaller market teams. So they kind of hold like resentment towards them. But the NFL sees that the smaller market teams are good, and they kind of need that, because that's how they become competitive. But it's just very interesting. So it looks like they were, according to this, unnamed worker who testified before Congress, they are alleging that 40% of the ticket revenue was hidden and was shown on a different book. And in this case, the NFL and the IRS were misled. So my question to you is that, do you think that the owner of the Washington football team is out, Dan Snyder? And if so, like, where do you think the team goes from here?
Well, I mean, I think he's going to be forced to sell. I think he has to sell. That's fraud. You can't have someone in the league committing fraud and defrauding the other owners of the league, since it's like a collective. I think the NFL is set up as like a co-op or whatever. So like all you need is a certain number of teams to vote him out, and basically you screwed every single member of the NFL. So I don't think they're necessarily having a reason for keeping him there. I think they're easily going to vote him out, and they're easily going to force him to sell the team. Now, the thing is, will he sell the team willingly, or will they have to go through the official process of forcing him to sell the team? I think he's going to just give up the team and sell it willingly in order to save face.
I think that he definitely should willingly sell the team, because at this point, if he did what he was alleged of doing, he was essentially stealing money from 31 other NFL teams. They're all going to vote against his own interest in keeping the team. And additionally, he could have allegedly screwed the IRS and screwed the American government out of money, which obviously can result in major fines, penalties, and possibly prison time. You definitely do not want to play with Uncle Sam's money, and that is not a game you want to play, especially if you're a billionaire in the current climate with the current administration looking to crack down on billionaires who are committing tax fraud.
Right. You don't want people committing fraud, and basically if he doesn't willingly sell the team, he's going to draw more media attention towards himself, and it's basically going to hurt his case if he ever does go to trial and they have enough evidence to prosecute him. So basically, I think he should try and sweep this under the rug, sell the team as quickly and efficiently as possible, and find a willing suitor to buy the Washington football team.
So on that same line of congressional investigations, obviously we previously spoke about Nancy Pelosi and her trading and disclosures through the Stock Act, to where her husband was placing trades. What was that? I heard you were going to say something. Here we go.
No, I was just laughing. You can continue. I was just laughing about that. I thought it was very funny.
So obviously we heard a lot about Nancy Pelosi placing trades, right? There was that whole Twitter account called like Pelosi Trades that, interestingly enough, was banned after it blew up on Reddit. Very interesting. But people were basically documenting and following Nancy Pelosi's trades, or excuse me, her husband's trades, which of course she didn't clue him in on potential legislative changes that would move the price of stocks that her husband was invested in. I mean, of course, who would have that conversation behind closed doors? But essentially, there was all this investigation going on into her background and what her husband was doing and so on and so forth. But it seems like there's been some new type of revelation going on, at least as of late, with Nancy Pelosi and potential trades that happened. And I think you definitely know a lot more about this than me. And I'm curious to hear what you got to say about this, because I know that you have a lot of stuff to say and you're very, very opinionated.
Yeah, so basically, Nancy Pelosi, she was basically committing, insider trading fraud. Put it simple, she's in Congress. She knows the legislation. She knows what's going on. She's trading stocks before earnings, and she has the best record of even professional hedge funds managers that I ever seen, let alone a congressperson who's uneducated on finance, and the financial system doesn't have access to basically trade flow information, doesn't buy press articles, doesn't buy other basically advantages that hedge funds buy, and she's basically beating out the people who have severe advantages. So that's a little bit suspicious, to say the least. But besides the insider trading stuff for Nancy Pelosi, I wanted to actually talk about something else that Nancy Pelosi did. So recently, Nancy Pelosi actually got the virus. She got the virus recently. The virus that was going around for 2 years. She basically got it, and she was known for basically berating Joe Rogan when he got the virus, and Elon Musk when he got the virus. She was berating these people on I don't know where she was berating them, but she was basically berating these people, and she was saying, "Oh, they're incompetent. They're not wearing masks. They're not doing this." But then she was caught in a nail salon or a hair salon, basically not wearing a mask, which is ridiculous and uncalled for. She's going around basically being a hypocrite towards these people, and then she doesn't do what she basically is proposing that other people do. So, basically, I consider her a clown, a bozo, She doesn't respect what she basically has no integrity. She doesn't follow what she says. She's a hypocrite, and she's just a complete asshole.
Wow, you really went off on Pelosi there, huh?
Yeah, what do you think about Pelosi? You think this is acceptable for a duly elected member of the congressional committee to fucking do something like this? Elected by the population of the United States of America, basically, doing something like this. I think it's uncalled for, and she should be thrown in jail along with Hillary Clinton and all those other cronies that are in the governmental power.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people, and I think it is a bipartisan issue, right? You have a bunch of these bozos that are representing both the left and the right, and they're completely clueless morons, and they really shouldn't be there to begin with, and they're really only in politics to enrich their own pocket. And I think the general public, for the most part, is pretty moderate, and they're pretty pissed about this. So you have people like Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, the good old commie, crazy Bernie Sanders, and you have the my favorite clueless bozo, Mitch McConnell, Cocaine Mitch. I don't know if I could say that word on YouTube, but I guess we'll find out. Then you have Mittens Romney, another clueless bozo. So these are people that they're not good people. Oh, then of course Jeb Bush. Who could forget low energy Jeb? Another another
Kelly
clueless,
Loeffler.
hapless dumbass.
Kelly Loeffler also did it too. So it's basically a double-sided issue that exists on both sides of the spectrum. But they got it, and there's basically no incentive to stop it since the people that make the laws are basically the ones benefiting from it. So this is the problem I see with a representative democracy, and there's not enough checks and balances being put into place here. And I think certain issues should actually be voted on directly, and they should have a direct democracy for certain issues, and then a representative democracy for other issues that are more time. There's more of a time constraint to deal with them.
So how do you feel about the idea of mandatory one-term limits and sort of this was an idea that was proposed to me. So it was mandatory one-term limits, and then also the idea of having a stipend to be used towards like living expenses and various different like necessities rather than a salary. And then obviously no pension that would come from serving in Congress or any sort of government position. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think to start, the salary should be cut dramatically. There's no reason they should make. I think they make like 180 something $1,000 a year. There's no reason they should be making that much for the job that they do. I don't necessarily know if you actually want them to make that much. You want people that that want to serve their country. That they're not there for a paycheck. They're working hard, to make the country great again. And you don't want these people that are just in it for the paycheck and in it for the pension and the other financial benefits that are there. You want people that are established, had a good career, are smart, intelligent, not in it for the money. And you want people that are looking to make a change. So I think they should cut these benefits dramatically, and reallocate them towards other services, other welfare services, other things, that are more important than lining the pockets of these politicians. Nancy Pelosi, etc., and other people in governmental power. They're working. They work 4 years and then they get a pension for life, and that's just totally uncalled for. If anything, right, they should work the 4 years of governmental service, and they might not necessarily be able to work another normal job since of security threats, etc. But they should be transferred to other governmental departments, say Department of Education, fire department, police, etc., some other governmental program, and they should be forced to work 20 years like everyone else is to basically get a pension. So even if there's term limits, they should have to work 16 years in another governmental department to receive their pension.
I'm glad you bring that up because I totally agree. So someone had this whole concept of mandatory one-term limits and then kind of having people work in different areas of the government, like you said. But they also said that rather than pay someone a salary, you pay them a stipend, and the stipend is based off of not the average income for the area of which they're serving as a political figure or a public figure, but rather the median, right? Because when you look at averages are typically skewed by the highest and lowest earners, which are evenly weighted, but a median, they're actually weighted proportionately. So I think that's a very interesting concept, and I think it's a good way to take all of the excess money out of politics and to kind of remove any sort of incentive for the wrong people to go into politics. And I think another main thing that can happen is just to outright abolish lobbying and make it so that any sort of lobbying is just completely illegal. And that'll certainly stop the wrong people from going into politics to begin with.
Right, I couldn't agree more. Lobbying is one of the most despicable things in politics today. It's where the elite, the rich individuals, basically have power to affect the outcome of an election, and basically those that are poor, which is the majority of the population, they're not getting their voices heard, and they're not being represented in the constituency like the rich elites are, which I think is a huge problem since these representative members are not representing a majority of the population.
I'm glad you bring up the rich elites because on that same note, it looks like there was a headline that came out from the Wall Street Journal earlier this week. And basically it says that the EU is planning to sanction two of Vladimir Putin's daughters. And that's what diplomats said that were familiar with the matter. So I didn't even know that he had daughters, which I think to a lot of people is very shocking because they weren't very public. He hasn't been very public with them. I was under the assumption he didn't even have kids, or if he did have kids, he kept them well out of the public eye. But why do you think the EU is looking to sanction his daughters, right? I mean, I would assume that in all likelihood, well, let's put it this way. I would assume in all likelihood that the EU is looking at the situation and seeing that maybe there's some type of potential for Putin to use his daughters as like an intermediary to bypass sanctions and the transfer of assets over to them.
Yeah, so basically, people think that Putin has only two daughters, which it's widely. I think it's somewhat widely known. I guess it's not basically known that much, but if you search, it says basically Putin has two daughters, and then there's speculation that he actually has a third kid with this mistress, but it's not necessarily confirmed or denied. I think he actually has like a lot more than even three children. Because during the Chechen War or during that time, basically you would have these Russian troops, and he was like one of them, where they would go around and they would basically RPE, they would RPE people to basically lower the morale of the Chechen people. And it's speculated that he actually has like maybe like 15, 20 kids that are like unknown to the rest of the world. That's just some things that people speculate. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but I would say he has actually much more than three children, and he probably has around at least 10 children. I find it hard to believe that he doesn't have a son to basically take over the I don't know, the Russian empire, or whatever you want to call it. I don't consider Russian empire, but most the Russian regime, whatever. After he dies, I think he actually has like much more children than people realize.
To get into science too much here, but they say that the father determines the gender of the child. So if he has three daughters in all likelihood, then it seems like there's like a very high likelihood that if he were to have kids beyond having three daughters, more likely than not they would be women, which is something interesting to mention.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily know that science. I don't think that's. I never heard of that before. I thought it was completely random in how what gene structure, whatever you get. But maybe you know more about that than me. Like why is that the case that it's more likely that he would have a father? I thought it would be basically 50-50 depending on each pregnancy.
No, so yeah, so not to get like too into detail, but it's not really 50-50. It basically has to do with the father determines the gender of the child. And there are certain people who are like genetically predisposed, like based off of their lineage, on having more women than men. So there are certain families, for instance, like I know a few different families where they've had like two or three girls and then they have another kid and then they have another girl. Like it just happens. And it's not really 50-50 because when you think about like the statistical probability, right? Like let's call it coin flip odds. Let's say it's 50% odds, boy or girl, right? There are only two genders. Anyone that says otherwise, get fucked. I'm only kidding. But so let's say 50-50 odds, right? So coin flip odds. So the odds of having like 3 girls in a row, it's like a 12.5% chance, right? Because at 50 in the first go, 50-50, girl or boy, okay, it's girl, right? Now the second time around, your percentage is cut in half. Now that's only a 25% chance of you having another girl. Okay, then what is it the third time? Then it's 12 and a half. And then after 12 and a half, I think it's like 6.75%, and then goes down, so on and so forth. So beyond like the third or fourth time, then you're talking about at least on a mass scale of families that have girls, like just girls in their family as children. You're talking about a situation where like it's just just like a mathematical improbability of having multiple kids and then all of them being girls, like beyond like the fourth kid. It's just like almost a mathematical improbability to the point where it wouldn't happen on such a mass scale. There's actually like quite, if you had to look, I wonder what that is. Maybe that's worth looking into at some later point, like how many families have like all girls or all girls or all, I can't fucking talk. Hang on, this is getting cut. It's actually worth looking into because we don't know how many families have all of one gender or all of another gender. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, even if he's more genetically proposition or genetically inclined to have girls, I don't think he would stop until he actually had a boy. So the odds might be against him, but as I said with the the second Chechen war, what was going on in that situation, and just my disposition towards his personality, or whatever, I think he has to have a son, in hiding somewhere that necessarily maybe certain people know about, but it's not widely known to the population.
Yeah, and on that same topic, just like a little bit of some historical stuff that you might find pretty interesting. So, like Henry VIII, if you remember him, right? He was the founder of like the Anglo-Saxon Church, so he actually was like Christian and he followed Christianity. He actually was more of like a Catholic. But the only difference between like the Anglo-Saxon Church, which is like the Church of England, and like Catholicism, is that you're allowed to remarry. So if you remember King Henry VIII, he wanted to have a son, right? He wanted to have a son to carry on the mantle. So every time he'd have a wife, the guy had like a million wives. Like I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but he had so many wives and he kept having kids with like all these wives and he couldn't have like a son, which was interesting because when you look at the science of it and the genealogy behind it, he was actually more genetically predisposed to having daughters, so much so that every single woman that he had a child with, he pretty much had a daughter with. So his whole reason for like breaking away from the Catholic Church was that he wanted to divorce all the women that he had daughters with because he wanted to have a son to carry on the mantle. So that's just more of a historical framework for you.
Thing is, though, during that time, you also have to look at the fact that people died much earlier. So there's a longer time for him to basically get more and more girls pregnant. So basically, there's even less of a factor that he doesn't have a son, even if he's genetically inclined. He basically, he has more time. People died in that time. I think people died at like what 20, 21 probably during that time. So people are living much longer. And I don't know what age men basically become infertile, but he has much longer time to basically achieve his goal. If that even is his goal, I think it probably is. Moving on, let's move on to I guess a different topic. You had like a reaction video that you wanted to show basically on people's finances and how they're spending money. Maybe we should move on to that and pull that up.
So actually, I'm just gonna cut what you said, but all right. So I actually have a segment for you. I was wondering if you'd be interested in it. It's a new segment that I came up with. It's called "Jesus Take the Wheel." I'm curious if you'd be interested in it. It's a segment where we're gonna have you react to different financial situations from people and see what you would do if you were in that situation. So obviously, it's aptly titled "Jesus Take the Wheel" because you are God after all, as your name suggests. So it'll be very interesting to see what your take is on this situation.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
hang
guess
on.
we could try that out, see how it works. Let's, pull it. Jesus takes the wheels. That's a good name.
Okay, so here we have Leela, who's 28 years old. She lives in Georgia. She earns $81,000 a year from her day job, and it says and her side hustles. Uh, I'm sorry. I'll restart this. That's definitely getting cut. Okay, so here we have Leela from Georgia. She earns $81,000 a year from her day job and side hustles, which how that breaks down is $60,000 a year plus a 10% bonus as a Salesforce consultant and about $15,000 from her YouTube channels that she has. She has $82,000 in student loan, credit card debt, and other purchases. And since then, she has tightened her budget and paid off $60,000 as of February 2022. So in her situation, now just to get into the demographics of it, she roughly spends her monthly budget is $6,300 a month. Her rent and utilities, you might want to write this down. It's $1,600 for rent and utilities. Discretionary is $1,000 a month. She pays $1,000 a month towards student loans. Her insurance is $707 a month. She saves $700 a month. She invests $610 a month. She spends $400 on food. That's quite a bit. $150 a month on business expenses. I'm assuming that's for her YouTube channel and her other varying streams of income. $97 a month on transportation. That's phenomenal. $50 a month on medical and $27 a month on subscriptions. So, based off of what I told you, with investments and savings only accounting for roughly less than 1/3 of her activity, what would you do and how would you proceed?
Well, the first thing I would do, right, is I wouldn't be paying off student loans at this current period of time. We're under a student loan moratorium by President Biden, which I don't necessarily agree with, but if it's being implemented, you might as well take advantage of it. And I'm not necessarily saying spend the money, but the money should be put off to the side, and you should just hold the money for the time being until the student loan moratorium ends, because you're not paying any interest. There's no reason why you should be paying the student loan your student loans off at this period of time. You should be taking the money that you would have spent the student loans on and basically keeping it and holding it to the side and saving, and you still have that money, but you basically don't pay it off until you necessarily have to. So that's point one I wanted to make about what she should consider and change on her finances there. Another thing is, she's not investing nearly enough. People say 1/3 is more than enough, that you should only invest basically 15% of your income. You should be I go by the method of you should be investing half of your income. If the IRS takes 50%, you should be investing 50%. That's how it goes. You pay yourself first, and before you pay any bills, you're the most important payee and the most important biller. If everyone else is trying to take your money, you got to pay yourself before you pay other people. Another thing is $27 a month on subscriptions. What is I guess that's probably like Netflix and Hulu and Spotify or something like that. That's pretty good. There's no reason why you should be spending $9,500 a month on TV. TV is antiquated. It's unnecessary, and there's much better content on YouTube, Spotify, Netflix, Hulu, etc. for a much cheaper price. $400 on food. I don't know how many people she has in her family. If that's just her, that's a little bit ridiculous. That could come down to around, probably, I would say
150 is a good number.
I would say 30 days in a month. I don't think $10 a day is that much. Maybe 300. At least cut it by 100. If you can cut it more, that's great, but you should be able to at least cut it by $100.
I think that she definitely needs to save and invest more. I like the idea of her paying money towards the student loans, but with the current, like you said, the current student loan moratorium being extended, there's no reason to. She should be setting that money aside. Insurance, $707 a month. I'm assuming that she should get medical coverage from work. I don't know why. Maybe she's not getting good enough medical coverage, in which case maybe she should shop around and look for a better job. There's no reason why she should be out of pocket. $707 a month in insurance is a little ridiculous. Rent and utilities, $1,600. That wasn't too bad. Discretionary, $1,000 discretionary. I think that's a little much, to be honest with you. And she has it classified as entertainment, travel, clothing, charitable donations, and pet expenses. Pet expenses are fine. Pet expenses are relatively cheap. Pet insurance is relatively cheap. You can get pet insurance for like $25 a month. So that's great. That's a great deal.
Yeah,
and you're
we'll include a plug for Lemonade down below so that you can get your pet insurance using our referral code. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
So no problem with me from pet expenses, charitable donations, clothing, to be completely honest with you. I mean, she is a woman, so women tend to spend more on clothing. It seems to be more of something that they're geared towards. But as far as clothing is concerned, I don't think clothing should be too much. Entertainment and travel. Travel, if she's smart, she can open up a credit card and charge some of her expenses on there and hit the minimum spend, and she'll be able to redeem it for free airfare and travel. So I think that might be worthwhile, at least if you look towards opening a American Express Platinum card or a Chase card, any sort of like a Chase Sapphire Reserve or just the Chase Reserve card in general. That could be useful for that. Entertainment, that seems like quite a bit though, especially considering she's spending $400 a month on food. I'm assuming entertainment, this is like going out with friends and drinking and whatever. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But at the same time, I think that she should tie some of that into her food budget. Investments at $610 a month, I think that should be a little more. So I'd like to see discretionary cut in half. I would like to see the rest of that money going towards either savings or investment, particularly investments. I think as far as savings is concerned, $700 a month is fine. Subscriptions, she's doing well. Medical expenses at $50 a month, that's perfectly fine with me. Transportation at $97 is phenomenal. Business expenses at $150. I actually wouldn't mind seeing that go up a little bit because she needs to invest in herself. She needs to invest in her business. If you don't really spend money on your business or spend money on ways to improve your business, you're not going to be able to put yourself in a position where you're going to be able to scale, I guess. You have to take your business seriously. It's very important. Other than that, I think she's doing pretty good. Rent and utilities, $1,600. She lives in Georgia. I think that could come down quite a bit. I think that maybe she should move in with like a boyfriend or move in with a roommate. But other than that, I'd say she's doing pretty good. Other than the student loans, I think that she's got to get rid of that at some point and get rid of that as soon as she can. But for the time being, set the money aside and focus on cutting your discretionary spending down. Cut that shit in half. Gear more towards investments, gear more towards business expenses, and save a little bit more. But other than that, I think she's doing pretty good.
Yeah, she's not doing bad for her situation. She's there's a couple of things I would change, but she's doing pretty good overall. So let's move on to I saw this video about this girl that has Down syndrome, and she basically started this cookie company that makes $1.2 million a year. And she basically sells cookies, she sells recipes, etc. And this is just a good example of what happens when you actually get to work and you don't complain about your disabilities, your shortcomings, etc. You basically just go out there and you work, and you don't cry for affirmative action. You don't cry for oh, poor me, I have this disability. Oh, poor me, I have a problem in this regard. Oh, poor me, I'm being racially profiled. Oh, poor me, I'm not being treated fairly. Oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. This is a prime example of what happens when you actually get to work and you actually do something to actually basically make progress. I thought I'd bring that up for the people so that they can actually learn to stop complaining in their daily life, because complaints get you nowhere. A complaint is as good as a piece of shit. You flush it down the toilet. You should flush all your complaints down the toilet, and you should never talk about them again. That's what I have to say about complaints. Flush them down the toilet like a piece of shit.